welcome to the Weekly Artifact. I'm Justin, and this is my co-host.
Hello, I'm Alex.
We're two former creative writing majors just searching for meaning in a sea of content. Every other week, we will select one piece of content each, an article, a video, another podcast that we found particularly interesting and discuss it. As always, our comments are our own and are not associated with any institution.
The show may contain... I forgot. The show may contain explicit language or themes. See the show notes for specific content warnings. Justin, what do you have for us this week?
Alright, so this week I went in a slightly different direction. I thought we had discussed politics enough in the last few weeks. So I found this video from a YouTube channel that I'm subscribed to called Braincraft. It's a good channel. I would recommend it. And this video is called The Emotions You've Never Heard of. So basically the video goes through and it starts off talking about how we really only have a few categories of emotions in terms of our language. And so even though we have a wide array of feelings that we can feel, our language to conceptualize those feelings is limited. And then it goes on to talk about if there's a difference between feelings and emotions. And basically it sort of uses the working definition that feelings are a physical state, whereas emotions are a mental state. However, we tend to use the word feeling and the word emotion interchangeably, and so in that way they're sort of the same, even though we might also think of there being a difference. But there's actually no scientific consensus on either what an emotion is or how we experience them. So at that point, the video then goes in to talk about three different theories of emotions. So the first is the James Lange theory, which was proposed in the 1880s, and says that emotions are an awareness of your response to a situation. So the video sort of gives the example of if you saw a bear in the forest. And so in this case, you would be aware that your heart is pounding, and so you would feel fear. However, this would imply that there's some sort of conscious delay between the stimulus of the bear and the emotion of fear, but there doesn't really seem to be a delay. It seems like once you see the bear, you also feel fear. So that could be a potential reason not to go with that theory. So another theory then came along in the 1920s, the Cannon-Bard theory, which proposed that the physical response, which would be the heart pounding, and the emotion, which would be the fear, are both triggered simultaneously by the stimulus, which would be the bear. However, this would imply that we have no control over our emotions, which also doesn't seem to be true, just given that different people can respond differently to different situations, and you can also perhaps influence what emotion you have to the same situation based on your will, I guess. And so the last theory then that talks about is the two-factor theory, which came out in the 1960s and proposed that emotions are a contextual interpretation of our feelings, which is to say that you might be aware that your heart is pounding if you see a bear, but also your heart might pound the same way if you were having a race with your friend. And so in the former, we might interpret it as fear, but in the latter, we might interpret it as excitement based on the context. The video doesn't actually offer any critique of this theory, but just acknowledges that the debate continues. So then from there, it goes on to talk about how because our feelings and emotions are likely based on judgment interpretation. That means that they're a product of our culture, and including the language that we have available to us, going back to the original point made. And it talks about how we can what it calls master our emotions by reinterpreting our bodily feelings, such as reframing butterflies in the stomach as excitement rather than nervousness, and also by acquiring more language to talk about these feelings. There are theories of language that sort of say that language controls our reality. I believe this comes from a theorist named Sausurre, but if you've seen the movie Arrival, you might also be aware of that. I probably will make Arrival a safe room one week because I feel like people don't really understand that movie, but that's a story for a different day. But in any case, the examples she gives is saying that how sadness could also be interpreted as dejection or resentment, or a less common word like collywobbles, or a foreign word like the Polish word żal. So just learning different words could have some different connotations. And then lastly, she says that categorizing and expressing our emotions has been shown to help with anger and stress management. So that is sort of the payoff to acquiring more language. So yeah, I don't know, there's like a couple places I could go with this. I guess I'll just note quickly, for anyone who might be as in the ivory tower as I am. It sort of reminded me of this thing called affect theory, which sort of talks about how there's like a pre-emotional response to things, sort of. So like the easiest way to think about it might be the way we talk about like animals responding to pheromones, and how the pheromone sort of like exists in the air, but before it's sort of been perceived, it still is sort of there as like a stimulus, and so that's the affect of it, is it's sort of like existence before it gets like processed, really. But we might also think about how there is art somewhere out there that could perhaps elicit different feelings from different people, and you might not be looking at it right now, but it's still sort of out there, and there's a moment between you seeing it and actually processing how you feel. That's sort of like its affect. I wouldn't really recommend getting too deep into affect, but I think it sort of does highlight the difference between when we sort of perceive something and when we sort of process it. But yes, anyways, I have better points to make about the video, but I figured I'd let you jump in.
I liked when she was talking about how, if you have more words available to you, you can process your emotions better. And I won't talk too long about it because this is your article and if you don't want to step on your toes. So she references a book called The Book of Human Emotions, and I wasn't sure. I thought she was going to go into it more. I guess what my expectations were is that it had a bunch of different words found in different cultures that don't have like immediate translations to English or I guess other languages. And I'm sure a lot of people have like seen lists around. I'm sure you're familiar with like some of these words that I'm referencing, but like the one that really I think sort of helped me know that like you're not like alone in experiencing these things just because we don't have a word for it. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, but it's French. It's called L'appel du vide, I'm gonna say, which translates to the call of the void, which is sort of like that like sort of very deep instinct that you have when you're like at a tall building to be like, what if I jumped off right now? Or like you're driving, you're like, what if I just like swerve off into the fucking like off a bridge or onto the curb or something like that, like sort of like very visceral like reaction to like do something very like damaging and like senseless, but you still like you gotta like sort of talk yourself out of it. It's like it's only there for a split second, but like it does exist. And so like knowing that these feelings are broad and universal enough to have their own like words in other languages, even if we don't have one itself, I think is very reassuring, if nothing else. And I would hope that book would contain things like that. And if not, I'm sure there are ones that do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember where I heard this, but I think that what do you call it, Call of the Void or something?
Call of the Void is the translation.
Yeah, I think that it's like it's actually like a survival sort of mechanism, because like if you sort of like think about the worst thing that could happen in a certain scenario, then you kind of like know what not to do. I guess I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but I just remember hearing that somewhere.
You're just like subconsciously preparing yourself for it.
Yeah.
I like that. I haven't heard that, but I like that.
Yeah, I wish I could remember where I heard that. Maybe I just made it up.
Maybe you just became a philosopher. Big man goes to grad school and thinks he's hot shit.
No, I definitely heard it somewhere. Yeah, I think this video was like interesting to me because this topic is just one I think about from time to time. But in some ways, like if you really want to be like as reductive as possible, really you either feel good or bad, sort of. And at times I found that to sort of be like a helpful way to think about things, but I think also as I've gotten older, like it has sort of gotten more useful and easier to like express different sorts of feelings. But yeah, I don't know. I thought that was sort of like an interesting. I don't know if you've ever had like any sort of situation where it's like helpful to be like less sort of descriptive when you think about your feelings or not, or do you always feel like having more words is useful?
Just saying, like, I don't really need to like elaborate or expand on how I'm feeling. I just need to know that I like don't feel good right now, and I can just like get through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you know like something is amiss, or you're just, or I think even honestly on the other side of it, I think if you know, if especially sometimes with me, like if I'm feeling like, oh, I'm feeling like good, like you should really, especially with those, I think just try to like capitalize it and ride the wave as much as you can, as opposed to like trying to like sort of like maintain or like capture this like lightning in a bottle, to use a cliche. Just like enjoy the day is like how I try to like exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, that could be like a good way to think about it.
But if I'm not answering it correctly, we can always. That's what editing's for. I can I can try again.
No, I think that works. So I think, especially like thinking about the beginning of the video where she's talking about we really only have like a few categories of language. Our language limits us to a few categories for thinking about emotions often. But I feel like also there has to be sort of a reason why that's is true. I think it partially has to do with the idea that maybe there are situations where it could be useful not to sort of like overthink it, or there are sort of like broader categories and some of these other feelings might be subcategories.
Right.
But I do think overall like it is useful to have more words at your disposal for the reasons you said, but I also think maybe there could be times when it could be helpful not to perhaps overthink it. I'm not sure. Yeah, I guess then also, because it was sort of talking about the different theories of emotions. If I had to say which one I would ascribe to, I guess it would be the two-factor one. Although I don't always think that bodily feeling even necessarily relates to emotion. Like I'm thinking, like you could, like a rock could like crack your windshield or something, and it's not really like a bodily feeling, but you would still like you might still be upset. So I don't know if that is different. I don't know. I guess maybe I have to like read up on the theory, not just watch a 5.5 minute video. But we spent enough time on this, so we can move on. What did you have for us this week?
All right. So my article for this week is. Fuck, it's still loading. Yo, shut up. I'm reading now. My article for this week is called "The Gig Economy Celebrates Working Yourself to Death," written by Gia Tolentino on The New Yorker, and talks about the weird place we find ourselves in now, where you can sort of pick up and drop any like very minimal paying job at the drop of a hat. But the article starts with a story that Lyft shared on their Twitter, I guess, but like probably just around. Opening with about a week away from her due date, Mary decided to drive for a few hours. Mary drives in Chicago. She picked up a few riders and then started having contractions. Luckily, as Lyft put it, the passenger requested a short trip. After completing it, Mary went to the hospital where she was informed that she was in labor. She gave birth to a daughter whose picture appears in Lyft's post. She's wearing a, quote, Little Miss Lyft onesie. Post concluded with a call for similar stories. Do you have an exciting Lyft story you'd like to share? Tweet us your story at Lyft_CHI. And so the article's talking about how, starting with this and sort of expanding out, is that I like this quote that the author put. It does require a fairly dystopian strain of doublethink for a company to celebrate how hard and how constantly its employees must work to make a living, given that the companies are themselves setting the terms. And yet this type of faux inspirational tale has been appearing more lately, both in corporate advertising and in the news. And it talks about how, well, obviously, I mean, this woman wouldn't elect probably to be picking up and driving people around for $11 a ride a week before she was due for her pregnancy. That's an insane thing to do. That's a bad thing that you shouldn't have to do anyways. You shouldn't have to feel compelled to drive around a week before you're pregnant to like make some ends meet and get like I said, the average is $11 a ride. And the thumbnail for the article And the company that they sort of take to task is an advertisement from a website called Fiverr, which I don't know if you read these articles as well, but I don't know if you knew about this website before reading the articles.
That was the one that PewDiePie paid those people to hold up that Nazi sign.
Oh my God, is it? Is that how he did it?
I think so.
I mean, I believe it. Holy shit. Holy shit, I didn't know that. I mean, that makes sense. But yeah, so Fiverr, for anybody that doesn't know, is just a website that used to be literally it's an online freelance marketplace that lets you pretty much do anything. Like, people sell any like good or service they're willing to do for $5. It's since expanded after a large outcry of people like, this is way too low of a market, or a price bottom that it's like been upped to like whatever they think is a fair price, and you're allowed to pay whoever you want for whatever you want. But it used to just be like as low as $5, exclusively $5, hence the name Fiverr with 2 R's. Now it's still a very like cheap marketplace, but the ad that was in New York City subways features a woman staring at the camera with a look of blank determination. She looks pretty strung out, and the quote underneath her face is, "You eat a coffee for lunch, you follow through on your follow through. Sleep deprivation is your drug of choice. You might be a doer." And this is like the idea of a doer, very much the pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea of like, you're just gonna like grind until you like get where you're going. And you're going to do that all at fucking $5 per like a day's work, I guess. Doesn't really make sense when you think about like the money you're definitely not making. But the article goes on to say, at the root of this is America's obsession with self-reliance, which makes it more acceptable to applaud an individual for working himself to death than to argue that an individual working himself to death is evidence of a flawed economic system. And I agree, but I'm also working 2 part-time jobs while being a full-time law school student. So I'm very much still just a part of the system and actively subjecting myself to it. But the system's broken or not, it's still existent. I got to get those dollars. But I will take a reprieve and let you say what you would like.
Well, firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on one of your first actual artifacts here.
Loose editorial opinion pieces aren't a good artifact, Justin.
Yeah, all of our 3 listeners won't know the hard work I put in to keep this show with artifacts in it. But yeah, no, I knew this one was going to be good because I'd actually already read it. But I was going to say that
Such a
it did
prick.
It did remind me of another article as well, which I'll just briefly bring up here. Mostly because the title of this other one was epic, but it was another Jackman article which we talked about 2 weeks ago. But the title was, "Under Neoliberalism, You Can Be Your Own Tyrannical Boss," which I thought was a great title. But the article itself is, I mean, it's worth reading, but it's not super interesting. So it's mostly just summarizing a study that says that basically neoliberalism self-perpetuates itself by encouraging workers to think individualistically, basically because there's this idea of meritocracy, like that, which means that not only will the best one make it, which means that you have to be like the perfect worker, but also that you have to make sure that everyone else is worse than you. So you not only are you like driven to perfectionism, but you're also encouraged not to help anyone else out. And that article sort of ends with saying that we need to start thinking about worker solidarity again. But I do think it's kind of related to this one, just in the sense that there's this idea like being the perfect worker is being always grinding, as they call it, or hustling, which is, yeah, it's just stupid. But I don't know. I mean, you touched on the part about her going into labor while she's working really encapsulates everything. But also just, I don't know, even just these jobs, like, I know that it's kind of complicated because there is, on one hand, like you said, like you do have to do what you have to do to survive. But on the other hand, these jobs are getting so bad. Like, I think certain drivers end up losing money just because if you factor in, like, when they eventually have to, like, repair their car and get their oil changed more often, like, they end up, like, losing money. I remember when I was in a class one time and we read this book called Personal Days by Ed Park. which I would also recommend. It was a very good book. The job in that book that they had to do was so bad, and pretty much everyone, when they left the job, ended up in a job where they made more money, which was actually, I had a real life analogy to that. I won't name names on here, but I once worked a job that was so bad that everyone who left it also made more money. But other people in the class were like, well, yeah, but you don't always have the luxury to leave your job. Like, some people have to work these bad jobs to survive. And I get that, but I think we really are hitting a point where some of these jobs are so bad that you might be better off unemployed. Because like I said, some of these drivers are literally losing money in the long run. As all I have to do is drive this car for a little bit, and eventually I'll be like a billionaire. I'll like hit my break or something. And it's like, how could you believe that? But I think some people really do,
Right.
though.
I think the biggest problem, like along with that, is that it's become like money equals like happiness or success, like very clearly, like it's a 1-to-1 ratio, where like, yeah, you could be Steve Jobs, but Steve Jobs became Steve Jobs because he was a fucking sociopath that had no friends or family, and everybody hated him, and he thought he didn't smell bad because he was a vegan and did use deodorant. Or you could just like hang out with some friends like on the weekends, like do like maybe a mildly shitty job or a job you like that doesn't pay that well, but you like are satisfied with what you're doing, and you just come home and just like have some like tea and like eat a biscuit and then just like go to sleep and wake up and it's fine. Like that can be a success. You can be happier than like most like aggressively like financially successful people are. Like anybody living in New York City is way more depressed than you are, and you should probably think of that as a W. Like my apartment, what I'm paying for my apartment right now, which is like an entire floor's worth with like 5 rooms, like wouldn't even cover a toilet seat in New York City. But like they would think they're more successful because their kitchen is also in their bathroom. Like that's not, but just this fact that they're making in New York City makes them like better, but that's just wholly incorrect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Yeah, I think there's like a weird conflation of money and happiness, because you do need money to be happy. But I mean, there are studies on this. I think 75,000 or somewhere around there is like the cutoff where like any more money you have than that will not make you any happier or something like that.
Depreciating value once you can like comfortably cover your assets,
Mm-hmm.
like at that point. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know what segment's next.
I couldn't tell if that was you trying to introduce it or if that was you telling me to introduce it.
Yes. This is staying in. Like me saying I know what's next, and then that was like me like not only like teeing it up, but literally like handing you the ball to like throw it instead of just hitting it, just making sure it really just goes. Gluing the ball to your bat.
So that will conclude our discussion of this week's text. Before we end the show, though, we always make time to go into our safe room. Now that we're in our safe room, Alex, feel free to go ahead and say what's on your mind.
Yeah, all right, Justin, I have something I want to say in the safe room, and that is the customer is almost always wrong. And speaking as somebody who has been a customer and who has served other people, the customer is almost exclusively wrong. It's not always necessarily their fault, but almost always they are wrong. And I don't know why. I know why the default is the other way, because we've been, for whatever reason, taught to think that. But not only should you look to the people that are actively like serving you, like the front line, like minimum wage workers, because they want to do the least amount of work too. Like they'll get you they want you to leave, and they don't want to hear you complain. And so they'll do what they need to get you to go and be like satisfied enough to like not complain or stick around any longer. So you should like look to them as like your lead. And I heard this phrase from you first, and I'm gonna guess you didn't invent it, but if you did, God bless, you really killed it. Minimum wage equals minimum effort, and like so, like I can't. Your expectations for anybody making $10 an hour, like they couldn't give less of a fuck about anything you have to say about anything. You're wrong, I promise. I promise. You shouldn't be harassing anywhere from a 16 to a 20-year-old, you middle-aged person. Treat every minimum wage worker with not even necessarily kindness. Just give them like the indifference that they give you back. Like, just don't go in angry. That's all. Honestly, anybody can ask is just to be just complacency. Like, just let it happen. Just if you insist on doing something that you don't want to do, it's a minimum wage job. So theoretically, you could do yourself probably better, but you're just being lazy. So just like if you didn't care enough to do it yourself, why they don't care enough to do it like how you want it done for your personal like needs. Like it's a systematic like factory style, whatever the fuck it is. So you're gonna get like what everybody else is getting, I promise. Just like let it go.
Yeah, I don't want to go into specifics about my former jobs, but I can say that I was always surprised how the customers would always find new ways to be wrong. Um, Even like situations where I was trying to help the customer, they would like insist on being wrong in like the least useful way to themselves, not even to me, because like you said, I could not care less about most of the stuff that was happening. I was just like, look, I'm getting paid, I'm on the clock, I'm getting paid the same amount no matter what happens. Like, I have no incentive to like screw you over. And they would like, yeah, they were just like the weirdest things were, yeah, I don't want to tell specific stories, but but yeah, it just I concur with everything you said. There are rare occasions where the customer is right, but they're the exception that proves the rule, as they say. I did have some like nice customers. Like some of them would be like funny or nice. In fact, most of them were fine, but yeah, then some of them, yeah, it's just like when they're determined to be wrong, like they come in hot.
Yeah, absolutely. And they do not let go. Oh my god.
The worst ones are the ones they complain about like existential problems that like you can't even control. Like if a piece of equipment's like broken or something, and they're like, "Oh, like why is it broken?" It's like it just is. Like I'm telling you now that it's broken. There's nothing I can do about it.
I know
You can
exactly.
stay here. You can leave.
I know exactly what story you're referencing. Oh my god. But why does this service cost $30? Like, brother, I did not. Like, my name is not on the like sign. I can't help you. Like, at no point do I get to negotiate with my manager what the charge is. Like, I can't. Managers are only good for pawning off customers. Like, he's like, I can go get a manager for you, sir. Like, that'd be great. You're like, oh, thank fuck. Shitty customers think that like when you go get the manager, like that they've bested you because like finally they're talking to like the upper hand. But no, you're just out of my life now. And like I would never have to. If I once it goes to the manager, at no point does it come back down to me. Like the manager might call me out like in a back room, and that's fine. But I never have to talk to you again. And if a manager ever were to bring me back to talk to a customer, that's the day I'm like not have that job anymore. All right, that's I feel safe. What do you want to talk about, Justin? What would you like to talk about?
All right, so my safe room topic, I'm actually going back to something I should have mentioned last week. In the It's Still Bernie article, there was a slight shot taken at Occupy Wall Street. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on that. I remember I think I was a senior in high school when the whole Occupy thing went down. And I was in this, it was like a AP Gov class or something. And I think I was literally the only one in the class defending Occupy. And I don't know if you remember those days or if you had any sort of similar experience, but man, that was such a weird time. Do you remember they would like say that the protesters were both too rich because they had cell phones, but also too poor because they should just get jobs?
I just like it was. I just remember how mad people were that these people were just like sitting in the street and how just like a violent and eventually got like macing people that were just like sitting down. Like it was just this weird, like very bad reaction. Like I just like I don't really. You guys are really mad. You must be hiding something. Like,
but anyways, but the article last week sort of said that Occupy was futile and a failure, and to some extent, like Occupy did sort of dissipate. But I don't think it was a failure because I don't think Occupy basically gave birth to the current left that we have now. Like that was like the first times since, well, I mean, it was obviously a response to the crash, and obviously we had leftist movements before, but it sort of seemed like I don't remember. I mean, I was young, so maybe I could be wrong about this, but I don't remember under Bush there being any sort of like sustained leftist organization. It seemed like it was very. I mean, I don't. Cause if you remember, like the Dixie Chicks were basically outcast for opposing the Iraq War, which that would never happen now. And I'm saying that is almost entirely because of Occupy. And so Occupy did have like it wasn't perfectly run. They had kind of like weird rules of governance where they needed like 90% support to decide on anything. So sometimes they would just end up not deciding on things. And I know some people would be confused about what they wanted, although they did have like various lists of demands. And again, because it wasn't centrally organized, they don't necessarily have like a one single list of demands, but they did have clear things that they wanted to. They wanted to arrest the bankers, break up the banks, and impose regulations to ensure there wouldn't be another collapse. I mean, it wasn't that hard to figure out what they wanted.
we saw that they were correct, and we did all those things pretty immediately, right?
Well, I mean, but that's the thing. It's like they were correct about everything. I mean, that was like the first time when people said, okay, like the real people we need to go after is Wall Street. And they went to Wall Street and sat there and said, we're not going to leave until you fix this. And the worst part about Occupy, or not Occupy itself, but just the whole circus around it, was you had all these corporate media outlets who, of course, are going to be against Occupy, just sort of slandering them, and then all these people going along with it, like, oh, did you hear what they said on MSNBC or CNN? It's like, what part? I mean, GE owned MSNBC at the time. Like, what made you think that GE was going to be like, oh yeah, no, we're down with these people that are trying to take down corporations? Like, it was just that was such a weird time, but my main point with Occupy is we need to respect it as giving birth to the current left. And regardless of your critiques, I was actually reading up on this to try and figure out why leftists were critiquing Occupy, and they basically said it was too individualistic, basically, in the sense that a lot of people who went there were sort of trying to think about how they personally were complicit in various, I don't know, in capitalism, I guess, rather than sort of thinking about solidarity and forcing the state to redress issues. I don't know the extent to which that's true, but in any case, we don't really need to be setting the super high bar for Occupy. It occupies the OG of the left, of today's left. Even if you still follow, you can still follow Occupy on social media today. They're bona fide leftists. I mean, you can't really mistake that. You can't really critique their politics even to this day. And so, yes, they ultimately got taken down again because they literally had police cracking their skulls, and the media wasn't doing them any favors. But ultimately, they deserve our respect, and I will not hear any more critiques of Occupy. That's our show for this week. Make sure to see the show notes for a link to view all the artifacts we discussed for yourself.
Music for the podcast is produced by Nicholas Pizzuto.
Join us again in 2 weeks as we find 2 new texts to discuss.
The president has been accused of sexual assault by 16 women. Bye!
Bye.